Welcome back, everyone. So last time we talked about all of the inventions that come out about this around this time, and while all these inventions help change the lives of the people who are the average citizen, it also changes the lives of the people who A, invent it, but also B, use those technologies every day, particularly people who are going to be known as robber barons. And so, if you remember at the end of the last video, I said that we're really going to start to begin to talk about what happens when capitalism kind of runs amok, when there's no checks and balances there, when you have that true idea of laissez-faire, the idea that government is hands-off. And so that's really our main topic of today's video is what happens when government doesn't really regulate business. And so your notes need to be titled The Corporations and Robber Barons. And that's really going to be the crux of our discussion today is how do these corporations help create the famous names and individuals that you may already know? Many of them live right here in Cleveland. So as business grew, many of them became too expensive or too risky for one person to own. So instead, corporations own them, and shareholders, those people who own stock in the company, they really begin to control them, meaning there's less risk on the business owner, as well as a promise of dividends to the stockholders. Selling stock was an easy way for corporations to raise what was known as capital. Capital, if you think of it this way, is really the money that a business is going to use to be able to build new things or pay its workers. And banks could make a profit through involvement in corporate financing. And so the banks would give loans to these businesses to help them get started. And then in return, those businesses would pay back interest on those loans. And so then banks are able to make money too. So for the first time, individuals are buying pieces of stock from companies. Banks are getting more involved in helping get those companies started. And people are starting to make lots of money as a result. Some individual businessmen were so successful that they gained worldwide recognition. Guys like John D. Rockefeller are a great example. Rockefeller founded an oil refinery in 1863, just a year before the Civil War ended, which became the Standard Oil Company of Ohio in 1870. Before long, Standard Oil controlled almost the entire American petroleum industry because Rockefeller created a monopoly, or the idea of when one company or person controls an entire market. He created that monopoly by driving his competition out of business. In 1882, he founded what was known as the Standard Oil Trust, a corporate board that brought stock in and controlled many companies in the industry. Standard Oil then owned its competition and could set prices across the industry. Once Rockefeller controlled the industry, he found ways to make even more profit, including demanding that railroads charged him less to transport his product. The railroads complied because if they didn't, they would lose too much business. Because remember, Rockefeller owns a lot of the system. Rockefeller's ideas are going to be something known as horizontal integration, which means you buy all of the competition to gain a monopoly. Another famous businessman at this time was a Scottish-born steelmaker named Andrew Carnegie, who began his career as a railroad employee and, after making smart investments in steel and iron, founded the Carnegie Steel Company. Carnegie controlled every step of the manufacturing process, a tactic known as vertical integration. He owned not only the steel mills, but also the mines and the transportation. So if you think about it, Rockefeller in his idea of horizontal integration means he's going to buy all of his competition. If he makes shoes, he's going to buy every shoemaker he can find, so he owns all of it. Whereas Carnegie's going to own the entire process. He would own where they make the shoelaces, where they buy the leather for the shoes, where they put the shoes together, where the railroad is going to take the shoes to market. He's going to own every single piece of the process. And so what I would like for you to do before I move on is take a moment, pause the video, and actually kind of copy down the chart to the right side over here, because it does a really great job of showing what vertical integration really is. So we've talked about a little bit in class about this time being called the Gilded Age. And it's mainly because there was so much inequality at this time that the period between kind of 1869 and 1896, became known as the Gilded Age because it looked like gold on the outside, but was something crude on the inside, meaning it was kind of a hollow house. It looked all nice and fancy, but there was really nothing going on of substance underneath. People like Rockefeller became known as robber barons, and they were called that by many people, meaning that while they lived like nobility, they were also unethical men who used trickery to become wealthy. In July of 1890, Congress passed something known as the Sherman Antitrust Act, based on the concept that competition is necessary in free markets. It made trusts and monopolies illegal, and it was kind of, it forced them to do business elsewhere, to change the way they did it. This is really the first time the government's going to kind of step away from that idea of laissez-faire. They're going to, for the first time, start to try to regulate business. Regardless, though, of how they obtained their wealth, Carnegie and Rockefeller were both known as philanthropists, which means they gave away large amounts of money and founded establishments such as Carnegie Hall and Rockefeller Institute. And the idea was that they had this money, and so they were going to give it away to kind of help society. Andrew Carnegie himself is going to write a book known as The Gospel of Wealth, which basically said you were kind of a terrible person if you were rich and you didn't give back to society. But while that sounds amazing, he also kind of saw people of lower economic status as almost subhuman, as less than himself and others. And so while it was great that he was giving back to society, he was kind of doing it with a very prejudiced slant to it. And so that's it. That's the main parts you need to have in your notebook about the robber barons and the creation of corporations. Important things you need to make sure you know. What the heck is a corporation? What is stock? What is dividends? And who are shareholders? Why is that important? How did it lead to the creation of modern day corporations? Because it's really important. Many of your parents probably own stock in companies, or at least know what stock is and how it affects different corporations. Also know about people like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller and their vertical versus horizontal integration. How do they take over? How do they build monopolies through these systems? Your homework for this, come up with 2 potential essay questions, which there are loads of information in this video that you could come up with. 2 potential essay questions should go at the bottom of your notes. Any other questions or comments should go in the margins so that way you remember them tomorrow for class. We are going to talk about the robber barons much more in detail. So these guys are not going away. So this is very important. And if you're not sure you quite understand this, or if you can't kind of recite it back to yourself, you probably should go back and rewatch this video. If you've got it, that's great, fantastic. I will see you tomorrow. Otherwise, make sure you review this one more time. Until tomorrow, have a great rest of your day. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.